Hello everyone, welcome to my studio. My name is Elizabeth Bostick and today we're painting this fun loose tree peony. I painted a few of them in preparation for this painting, which I turned into cards, and I'll post that video in the future. For today's painting, we're using a size 16 round brush. I find that it holds a lot more water and a lot of paint, so you can paint longer without having to go back into the water more often. And I'm using the cadmium yellow light in little strokes, the ones towards the top of this bowl of yellow, more vertical up and down, and then the ones towards the bottom, more horizontal left to right. And then I'm adding the cadmium deep yellow, but you can use orange if you don't have two different hues of yellow. You can use a light yellow and an orange, or like I am, a light yellow and a darker yellow. It just gives it a little more interest into the yellow center part of the flower. And then I'm making a puddle of magenta rose, which I'm using for the petals, and I'm using the very tip of the brush to make kind of a frayed edge, as the tree peony that I was looking at had kind of a frayed edge to the petals. And I make the little motions up and down towards the top and then the larger swoops towards the bottom, so it looks like the bottom of those petals down below. So it almost looks like a nest with a center of glowing yellow, but not quite round, more like an upside down heart shape perhaps. For the stem, I'm mixing up the cadmium yellow light and just a little bit of the bright green. I'm using the Rosa Gallery Botanical 28 colors, and it's just called bright green. But the pigments are PY151 and PG7 if you have a different set and you're trying to match the same color. If not, you can use whatever green that you would like to use for this. So I start off with the brighter green color all the way down to the bottom. You can see that my stem is not straight. Don't worry about making your stem straight. This is just about having fun, being a bit more loose with this. And then you can see that I'm adding a little bit of ultramarine blue at the top, so it makes a shadow when the stem is still wet. The ultramarine blue blends in a soft way with that wet on wet blending to give it a gentle shadow. Now for the leaves, I am trying to fill up that negative space. And by negative space, I just mean all that white paper on the left and the right of the stem. And to do that, I'm using that same green, and I've made another wash of it, or a puddle of it, as you can see on the ceramic plate. And then I am dabbing in, while it's still a puddle of very wet color on that leaf, the ultramarine blue. And you can see I'm wiping some of it back off, some of the green back off onto the paper towel, because it's a bit too wet, a bit too much of a puddle in the paper. And to do that, all you need to do is wipe off your brush so it's a bit drier, and then it will soak that wet paint back up kind of like a sponge. And then I'm using that same color for the next part of the leaf. And for these peonies, they're a bit different from regular peonies. The tree peonies and the Ito peonies, their leaves are a bit different from regular peonies. They have, I think, a more of an interesting leaf, a fun leaf to paint where you can almost do anything you want with it, but it's 3 parts at the top usually that have little spikes to them, and then 2 towards the bottom. Most of them look kind of like that, where there are about 5 parts of each leaf that comes off of the stem of the flower. And for this leaf, I am adding in ultramarine blue towards the bottom of the green leaf, using that emerald green and then ultramarine blue, and then adding some of the cadmium yellow light to the top of the leaf. And this will be the underpainting I'll go over it with a glaze of more green, so it won't be quite of a colorful leaf in the end, but I do think that that look is fun. And you can leave it that underpainting look, that multicolored look if you'd like. If you'd like to have fun with that, or you can just paint them in a solid green. But I think it's a lot of fun to play with the different colors with the wet on wet blending technique, and to see how far you can push it with adding different colors into the leaves or into the petals. You can always tone it down a bit when it's dry by going over it with a solid green. Once it's dry, with a solid green layer, a solid green glaze, or if it's in the petal, a pink glaze layer. So now I'm doing the little leaves that are right underneath the petals, and I'm using that same emerald green and then dabbing in some of that ultramarine blue for a shadow, so it looks like the sun is hitting the flower and there's a shadow right underneath it. And I'm doing it while the leaf is still wet, so it gives that really soft blending effect. Now I'm adding in some of that cadmium yellow light, and this next leaf will just be a slightly different hue of green, so it'll just be a little bit warmer since I added that yellow. But just like the other one, I'm adding in a little bit of the ultramarine blue while it's still wet, so it has the continuation of that shadow right underneath the lower part of that petal. For the next leaf, right underneath the flower, I'm doing it the same way, where I'm using the green, and this time I'm adding a little bit of the emerald green in with the bright green. And so this leaf will be another hue of green. I like to do this with the greenery, where I use many different hues of green, or many different shades of green, many different colors of green, to add a little bit more interest to the greenery. I really love to paint leaves, so maybe that's why I like to give them a little extra attention, but I think it adds more interest to the painting when you have all different greens, warm yellowy greens, cool blue greens. You can even add more of a brown or red to the green to make it more of an olive green. For this next set of leaves, I mixed in more of the emerald green and then mixing in some of the yellow to make it just a bit warmer than the emerald green is on its own. And I have a pretty nice big puddle of the green that I'm working from. So I just, again, I'm trying to fill in as much of that space, as much of that area as I can with the leaves, and also balance out the right-hand side. So I just do a swoop down with the green, and now I'm moving that watercolor back up the stem, which makes it a little bit darker. And then I'm adding in some more of that green to it, and it's a pretty bright green. I'm kind of in a springy, summery mood, I suppose, where right at the moment I'm really attracted to bright colors, and I'm really enjoying this combination of emerald green and yellow, or bright green and emerald green. But you can use whatever color green that you're really attracted to at the moment. And again, I'm playing with the fun shape of the tree peony and Ito peony leaves. They have a lot of movement to them, a lot of curves, a lot of points, and they're a lot of fun to paint. So again, I'm just moving that paint around and filling in the entire leaf while it's still wet. And that way I can drop in or dab in some of that ultramarine blue, and it will give it a soft shadow and a smooth drying line. It won't add a harsh drying line, as it will when you add wet paint to, if I had added it to a dry leaf, it would give you a hard line, but because I added the ultramarine blue to the leaf while it was still wet, it gave you a very nice soft drying line. It helps it to blend together. And here I'm doing the same thing to this leaf where I'm adding that ultramarine blue for the shading to give it more interest and to add more color to it. The third part of the leaf, or maybe you would consider it the fifth part of the leaf, I'm not sure. You have that top of the leaf that's split into three, then you have one on the right hand side coming down, and then you have this little leaf on the left hand side coming down. It's done in the same way where I'm filling the entire thing in so the whole leaf is still wet all at the same time, so that way it has a smooth look to it. And then I'm going up the stem with that same green to make it just a little bit darker. While that leaf is still wet, I'm adding in some of that cadmium yellow light mixed in just a little bit with the green, and I'm mixing it in to the leaf while the leaf is still wet to give it a different hue so it has more of a warm glow to it, and you can see the difference more between that leaf and the more blue-green of the leaves above it. I'm now filling in on the right hand side some of that negative space, as it did not look balanced to me, and I really like to fill in on these botanical paintings as much of the space as I can when I feel like it is needed. For the shadow for this leaf, I'm using not the ultramarine this time, but the emerald green. Just going in with the emerald green and giving it a bit of a shadow towards the bottom. And then I decide to make the whole thing a bit richer in color, so I'm using that same emerald green and going over what I've already done and making the leaf just a little bit bigger. I felt like the bottom of this painting, it just needed a little bit more weight. And with that darker value, that darker hue of green and the larger leaf, now it feels more balanced to me. I then decide to go over that leaf where I had the ultramarine blue, and then I had the yellow in the same leaf, where you can really see the difference. And it's completely dry now, and I'm going over it with a wash of that emerald green and bright green mixed together. This gives it a glazing effect where you can still see the blue and the warm yellowy, more yellow-green glowing from underneath, but it changes the hue of that leaf into more of just one solid green color, with just those two different hues, the more blue-green and the yellow-green shining through from underneath. And now we're ready for the second coat of petals, or the second set of petals, and I'm using a puddle of magenta rose. This is a little bit thicker from the first set of petals, so it's a little bit darker. And to test this, you can use a piece of paper that you test the first wash on, and you can put your second wash next to it, dry it, see if it's a little bit darker, or you can just go for it and have fun with it. Even if it's not much darker, where you overlap the two layers, it will be darker, and you'll be able to see the difference. So I'm using those same little strokes with giving the petals a frilly edge, and I've painted in two more thick petals right on top of that yellow, so it gives it more of an orangey glow towards the center. I like the way that it hides a little bit of the center of the flower. It gives it a little bit more interest, a little bit more of a 3D look. And then I'm going around the entire heart shape or nest shape of the flower and putting in more of those up and down little strokes to give it more of the frilly petal edge kind of look. And I'm making sure to leave some of that lighter pink in there so it looks like there's a bit of shading. And then going down on the very bottom edge of that kind of upside down heart shape, the very bottom of those petals, adding in a bit of shading there. And then for the very center of the flower, I'm going in with the burnt sienna and adding just little dots of burnt sienna. So it looks like the very center of the peony. Once I'm done with the center of the peony, I use a hairdryer to make sure that it is completely dry. And once it's completely dry, I make another puddle of the magenta rose. So this will be the third layer of magenta rose that I'm going to use on the petals. You can stop right here. In some of my practice peonies, I did only the 2 layers, and I really do like that lighter pink look. But for this one, I'm going ahead with a third layer of the magenta rose. And what I'm doing is I am adding a bit more of a darker hue of the pink to the edge of some of the petals to really kind of bring them forward, to add attention to them, and then also adding it in the back as if it is some shading and some more richer color in the peony. And I'm also adding it to the very bottom swoops of those 2 front petals to act as a bit of shading. And then I am also adding a bit of water to it and adding some more of the lighter hue of pink petals on each side. As for this peony, I wanted it to be a bit more wider, a bit more fuller. And so I'm adding some more of the lighter petals to give it that size that I was going for. I'm making sure to keep the edge of those petals, those really little strokes, so that it looks like almost a frayed edge. To me, the tree peony that I was looking at, it looked almost like crepe paper. And it was just a really interesting, neat texture. And then I'm going in towards the center of the peony and I'm adding a bit more interest by adding in one more petal. And we're done. I hope that you've enjoyed this painting. I really enjoy painting with you and sharing, hopefully, inspiration. I've done many of these peony paintings and each one looks incredibly different from the other. So I hope that you loosen up, have fun with this. And if your painting does not look anything like my painting, none of my paintings looked like one another. I just had a lot of fun with it and I hope that you do too. Have a great day and I'll see you next time.